The first thing Jack Callahan noticed wasn't the cold. It was the porch lights. Not the ones he'd installed last spring, but newer, sleeker LEDs blinking like strangers on his own front stoop. After nearly 9 months working a massive infrastructure project in Alaska, he was finally home. At 59, Jack had poured his career into solving other people's problems. Roads, dams, budgets held together with spit and blueprints. And now, fresh off a job that saved an entire county from collapse, he was looking forward to something simple. His own bed, his dog, his wife's laugh. Instead, the house felt off. The driveway was too clean. The garden had been mulched. Someone else had been tending to his world. He turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. Inside, familiar furniture stood at awkward angles, rearranged. Laughter floated from the living room, then stopped. Dead silence. His wife Linda sat on the couch beside a silver-haired man Jack didn't recognize. The man wore Jack's favorite robe, the one from their anniversary in Denver. "You're early," Linda said, blinking at the clock. "We thought we had more time." Her voice wasn't angry, just annoyed. Jack said nothing. He set down his bag, took in the changed curtains, the missing photo frames, the look on his grown daughter's face as she walked in and didn't hug him. "This is Grant," Linda said flatly. "He's been helping out." Grant stood, offering a handshake and a smile that made Jack's stomach turn. "Just keeping the lights on while you were off saving the world." Jack nodded once. Calm. Controlled. But inside, something cracked. Not rage. Something deeper. The kind of silence that settles right before a storm hits. He'd built bridges his whole life. He didn't like being forced to burn one. The next morning confirmed what Jack had feared. Grant Delaney wasn't just a passing mistake. He was a fixture now. He cooked breakfast like he belonged there, flipping pancakes on the griddle Jack had bought for Linda on their 25th anniversary. He poured coffee into Jack's mug, the one with the faded "One Dad" printed on the side. Jack said nothing, just watched. Every small detail was a gut punch. The dog, Murphy, used to bolt into Jack's arms. Now he barely lifted his head from Grant's feet. The garage door opener had been reprogrammed. A second toothbrush sat in Jack's bathroom, alongside new cologne that smelled like citrus and ambition. Linda moved through the house like a host showing off a rental property. No warmth, no guilt. "You were gone a long time, Jack," she said, not even trying to sound sorry. "We all had to adjust." Jack wanted to ask why she hadn't said anything during their weekly calls, why she'd played nice when she'd already locked him out of his own life. But he stayed quiet, watching, logging everything. That's how you survive a collapsing bridge. Know every bolt before it fails. Ben, their 28-year-old son, nodded briefly at his father before disappearing into the basement. Rachel, 26, had moved back home, just temporarily, Linda said. But Jack could see the truth in her guarded eyes. These weren't just adult children caught in an awkward moment. They were in on it, or at least convinced to stay out of it. Grant leaned against the counter, too comfortable, too casual. "We've got a good rhythm going here. Didn't expect you to be back so soon." The words were friendly, the tone was territorial. Jack looked at him, slow and deliberate. "I can see that," he replied. The message was clear. This wasn't just his house anymore, not in anyone's eyes but his own. But that was going to change. Jack didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply opened the back door, stepped outside into the crisp morning air, and made one promise to himself. "You took my place. Now I take it back." Jack spent the night at the Lakeview Motor Lodge, a place he hadn't thought about in 20 years. The wallpaper was still peeling, the heat still rattled, and the mattress had more dip than firmness. But it was his space, and for now that mattered. He sat at the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the home security app he'd almost forgotten he had. Years ago, after a neighbor's break-in, He'd quietly installed a discreet surveillance system around the house. But back then it was for protection. Now it was for answers. He scrubbed through footage like a man searching for his own ghost. What he found nearly buckled him. Grant had been in the house for months, walking around in Jack's slippers, holding a beer in the garage Jack had built with his own 2 hands. There was a clip from 5 months ago, Grant unlocking the front door with a key. Another of Linda moving Jack's framed diplomas into a box. Then came the worst. Audio. Jack listened as Linda stood in the kitchen coaching their daughter, Rachel. "If he asks why we didn't tell him sooner, just say we weren't sure how. If you stay cold, he'll leave faster." In another clip, Ben is in the living room, irritated. "So we just act like he doesn't matter anymore?" Linda's voice, calm and calculating. "You don't have to be cruel, just distant. If he feels unwelcome, the settlement goes smoother. I need you to trust me." Jack sat in silence. There it was, in his own home, on his own cameras. Proof that his family wasn't just drifting. They had been turned, reprogrammed. And he hadn't seen it coming. He typed out 3 different texts to Linda, his kids, even Grant. None were sent. What could he say? That he was heartbroken? Betrayed? That wouldn't undo the manipulation, the months of deceit. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about control. Jack knew bridges. He knew foundations. This marriage, this family, whatever it had been eaten from the inside out. And if they wanted war, they should have remembered one thing. Jack Callahan didn't lose. He rebuilt. Stronger, smarter, and he never ever struck first without knowing exactly where to land the final blow. Jack didn't march back in and demand justice. That wasn't his way. He made one call. To Eddie Sloan, an old friend from high school who had gone from sheriff's deputy to private investigator after retiring early. Jack knew Eddie had the 2 things this job needed: discretion and a long memory. "I need everything on a guy named Grant Delaney," Jack said. "And I mean everything." Within 3 days, Eddie handed him a manila folder thick enough to crush a lie. Grant wasn't just Linda's new flame. He was a serial opportunist with 2 bankruptcies, 1 revoked financial license, and a trail of short-lived relationships with middle-aged women who had one thing in common: assets. Worse still, Grant wasn't just moving in, he was planning a takeover. Jack's name had been removed from a joint account without notification. A new insurance policy had been taken out on the house, listing only Linda as the primary. The man was moving like a corporate raider. Only this wasn't a hostile takeover of a business, it was Jack's life. And Linda, whether blind or complicit, was right there beside him. But it wasn't just paperwork and power plays. Jack saw the manipulation unfolding in real time. Text records, dug up by Eddie, showed messages from Linda to both kids, planting doubts. "Your father always chose work over family. Don't expect him to come back and suddenly care." She was rewriting history, and they were too hurt, or too confused, to question it. Then came the kicker. Eddie pulled up a recorded call between Grant and a local contractor bidding for the same city project Jack had just finished. "Callahan's reputation won't survive the month," Grant had said. "Once the rumors hit the right ears, they'll drop him like a bad transmission." Jack leaned back, letting it all settle. Grant was poisoning the well. Whisper campaigns, strategic leaks, even reaching out to the board that controlled Jack's pension advisory contracts. It was smart, vicious, and personal. But Jack wasn't out of moves. He was just getting warmed up. They thought the old man would roll over. They forgot the years Jack had spent designing structures to endure storms. He didn't panic under pressure, he calculated, and he was already building his next move. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers hit Jack like a brick through a window, delivered by courier, signed by Linda, and pushed by a name he recognized immediately: Marshall Keene, a ruthless divorce attorney with a reputation for bleeding older men dry. The terms were outrageous: 70% of their assets, full ownership of the house, and monthly spousal support calculated not on Jack's current earnings, but on inflated future projections of consulting work. The kicker? A clause demanding he forfeit any claim to the family property in exchange for peaceful dissolution. It read like a business acquisition, not the end of a marriage. Jack brought the papers to Mara Trent, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney known for winning when the odds looked bad. She'd handled municipal lawsuits, corporate betrayals, and one or two ugly high-stakes divorces. She read the documents twice before speaking. This is a power play. They're expecting you to roll over. It's all built on the assumption that you're too tired, too proud, or too guilty to fight. Jack didn't blink. Let them think that? The next week, the campaign against him kicked into high gear. A city board quietly postponed reviewing his next consulting bid. One former client emailed him, nervously asking about some things I heard. Nothing personal, just questions about your last contract. Even his financial advisor pulled back on a planned investment, citing bad optics. Eddie called with confirmation. Grant was behind it all. He's leveraging every favor he's got. Planting stories, poking your reputation with a stick until it falls over. Jack nodded slowly. Let him. I want to see just how far he thinks he can push. Mara urged him to go public, defend himself, get ahead of it all. But Jack knew better. You don't chase shadows. You let them stretch long, let them overreach. He moved into a modest camper by the lake, canceled his usual meetings, and let the silence speak for him. To the outside world, it looked like Jack Callahan had been defeated, that he was licking wounds and quietly preparing to disappear. Linda's lawyer was emboldened, upping their demands. Grant bragged to friends that the house would be in his name by summer. What none of them knew was that every move, every silence, was deliberate. Jack wasn't hiding. He was baiting the hook. And the bigger the bite, the harder he'd reel in what was his. By March, Jack Callahan had become a ghost in his own town, and that was exactly the image he wanted to project. He'd traded his truck for an older model with no Bluetooth or GPS, stopped wearing the tailored work jackets, moved into a 19-foot camper by the lake with a leaky skylight and a propane stove that hissed in protest. From the outside, it looked like he'd folded. No more city meetings, no more contracts, no more public appearances. The rumor mill went into overdrive. He was broke, depressed, maybe even sick, and every bit of it made Linda and Grant more confident. That was the point. In reality, Jack was building something much more precise than a bridge. With Eddie's help, he'd started mapping out the connections. Grant's shady deals, his shell companies, the timing of Linda's financial moves. There were emails, voicemail transcriptions, land registry flags. Bit by bit, Jack was collecting proof. One revelation hit like dynamite. Grant had quietly submitted a proposal to manage a redevelopment contract Jack had helped design. Using insider knowledge, only someone close to Jack could have gotten. Meanwhile, Jack let settlement talks inch forward. He showed up to meetings looking tired, agreeable. I just want it over with, he said, more than once. Linda's side interpreted it as surrender. Her lawyer began acting like the deal was done. Grant grew bolder, seen at local wine tastings and fundraisers, introducing Linda as my better half. At one event, Linda wore a necklace Jack had given her 20 years ago. Grant mentioned it came from a small antique store in Vermont, erasing Jack from the memory entirely. Jack didn't respond. Not yet, but the pressure was mounting behind his eyes like a pressure gauge nearing red. He'd visited the house one afternoon when he knew no one would be home. The place smelled different, softer. Not bad, just not his. He saw Grant's golf clubs in the garage, his boots by the door. Then he spotted something that changed everything. Legal pads in Linda's handwriting, breaking down projected divorce figures based on Jack's theoretical contract wins. It was never about love, it was about leverage. Jack stepped outside, closed the door behind him, and stood on his own lawn as if it were foreign soil. All right, he muttered. Time to stop playing dead. The week before the court date, Jack Callahan's silence snapped, but not publicly. Every move he made was calculated, targeted, like pressure points on a steel beam. He compiled a flash drive containing financial irregularities tied to Grant's businesses, offshore accounts, dummy LLCs, and one particularly damning trail showing funds moved into Linda's account just days before she filed for divorce. He didn't send it to his lawyer. He sent it anonymously to the local business journal, the city ethics board, and a reporter he trusted who owed him a favor from years back. No names, just facts. Then he sat back and let the fuse burn. Meanwhile, he sent personal invitations to a handful of city officials, former clients, and 2 board members from the Pension Trust Committee. If you have any interest in truth, the note read, you'll want to attend my hearing Monday morning. No further explanation. He didn't need to give one. Behind the scenes, Maura Trent was prepping like a trial lawyer in a murder case. Once this goes public, we're not just dismantling their narrative, we're blowing it up. Jack nodded. Good. Let them be shocked when the fire reaches their feet. Linda, on the other hand, was coasting on what she thought was a final victory lap. She updated her social media with smiling photos of her and Grant at a wine bar. She listed Jack's grandfather's workshop tools on a local resale site. Grant hosted a backyard barbecue at Jack's house, inviting neighbors he never bothered to learn the names of. Word around town was they were shopping for a cabin in the Rockies with the money they expected from the divorce. They'd already measured the curtains for Jack's study. Then, one evening, Rachel texted Jack. Just 3 words. Are you okay? It was the first sign of doubt, the first crack in the wall. He replied, Come to court Monday. I'd rather you hear the truth in person. He didn't add emotion. He didn't plead. Because Jack wasn't after revenge. He was after clarity and control. They'd staged their con in silence, assuming the target would fold. What they didn't expect was that the man they'd tried to erase was about to walk into court with the kind of truth no one could ignore. Monday morning arrived clear and cold. Steel gray skies above the county courthouse, the kind of weather Jack Callahan had always trusted more than sunshine. He walked in alone, wearing his well-worn suit and the calm expression of a man who had waited long enough. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs, but it wasn't just attorneys and court clerks. In the gallery sat familiar faces, a former city manager, 2 pension board members, the business reporter Jack had tipped off, and at the very back, Rachel. She didn't wave. She just sat with her arms folded and eyes locked on her father. Inside, Linda wore confidence like a tailored coat. Her hair was perfect, her expression poised, and Grant, sitting beside her, wore a smug grin like he was about to close a deal. Their attorney, Marshall Keene, barely acknowledged Jack. He was too busy organizing glossy folders labeled assets, failures, and incomes. They had the narrative locked in. Jack was emotionally distant, possibly unstable, financially shaky, and undeserving of the life he'd built. Then Maura Trent stood up. Your Honor, before we proceed with the settlement terms, we have a motion to submit new evidence that directly affects the credibility of these proceedings. Keene objected immediately, waving it off as a stalling tactic, but the judge, seasoned, stern, and in no mood for games, allowed it. One by one, the dominoes fell. Eddie Sloan was the first to testify, laying out the paper trail of Grant's fraudulent business history and his cozy dealings with contractors connected to Jack's old projects. Then came the audio recordings, Grant openly bragging about manipulating the divorce to strip Jack of everything, laughing about how easy it is when the guy's too proud to fight back. Next came the emails between Linda and Grant, conversations that outlined the timing of the asset transfers, the targeted character attacks, and the coaching of the kids to act cold to their father. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of paper rustling and the occasional sharp breath from the gallery. The final blow came from the reporter, who confirmed the documents had been submitted to the state ethics board that very morning, triggering an official investigation. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was ice. What I've seen today isn't just manipulation, it's orchestration. And this court will not reward deceit. Keen quietly leaned toward Linda, whispering something that made her face go pale. Grant, visibly sweating, stood up and walked out without a word. The judge referred the case for possible charges of perjury and fraud. Rachel sat stone still, tears in her eyes. Linda, for once, had nothing to say. And Jack? He just sat there, calm and still. He hadn't needed to shout. He hadn't needed to beg. He just needed the truth, served plain, under oath, for everyone to see. The courtroom emptied slowly, but Jack didn't move. He sat in the same spot, hands folded, watching as Linda packed up her bag with trembling fingers. Grant was gone, disappeared the moment the recordings played. Rumor had it he skipped town that afternoon, just ahead of some very interested state investigators. Linda tried to maintain composure, but her attorney wouldn't even look her in the eye. The settlement collapsed in real time. Her demands, house, pension, future earnings, all gone. The judge ordered the original prenuptial agreement in force, meaning Jack kept everything he'd built: the house, the land, his retirement, and his name. Linda was given 30 days to vacate the property and pay a portion of the legal fees. The courtroom drama had bled into the community by evening, and phones rang quietly across boardrooms and living rooms. The story had spread. Jack hadn't lost everything. He had played the long game and won. Outside on the courthouse steps, Rachel waited. She stood awkwardly near the concrete railing, arms crossed, eyes red. "Is it true?" she asked as Jack approached. "What they said about Mom and Grant?" Jack paused. "Most of it, yeah. But I'm not here to bury anyone. I just want the truth out." Rachel looked away for a moment, then back at him. "They made us think you didn't care, that you left us." Jack nodded slowly. "I did leave for work. I should have fought harder to stay close, but I never stopped caring. They just counted on you never asking why." She didn't say anything else, just hugged him. Tight. Jack stood still, eyes closed, one arm gently wrapping around his daughter. It wasn't a fix, but it was a beginning. And after everything, that was more than enough. Jack returned to the house a week later, not as a visitor, not as a ghost, but as the owner once again. Linda had left without a word, just a note on the counter and a half-packed box of kitchen items she had apparently decided weren't worth taking. The place was quiet, but no longer hostile. The air smelled like dust and old paint, not perfume and deceit. Jack walked through each room slowly, touching the walls he'd patched, the cabinets he'd built, the back porch he'd sanded by hand. It wasn't just a house, it was his life, reclaimed piece by piece. He didn't change much right away. He fixed the back door hinge, rehung a few family photos that had been boxed away, and tossed Grant's cologne straight into the trash. Later that evening, he built a fire in the backyard pit and sat in the old camp chair he'd almost given away. Rachel and Ben showed up without warning, just walked into the yard like they used to when they were kids. No dramatics, no long speeches, just presence. Ben handed him a beer. Rachel sat beside him, knees tucked up, quiet. "We've got a lot to unlearn," she said softly. Jack nodded. "So do I." They didn't talk about Linda, or Grant, or court. They talked about fishing trips they missed, the smell of sawdust in the garage, how the old dog used to bark at leaves. It was awkward, it was real, and it was the first honest thing they'd shared in months. Jack didn't need an apology. He needed this: his kids, his home, and his footing. The past had taken a swing, but he was still standing. Not with vengeance, but with something better: dignity, direction, and the slow, steady rebuild of trust, brick by brick. Jack Callahan's story is a hard reminder of what happens when trust is abused and silence is mistaken for weakness. He didn't scream, threaten, or fall apart. He watched, he planned, and when the time was right, he acted with precision. The real lesson here? You don't have to fight dirty to win. You just have to fight smart, whether it's your marriage, your money, or your reputation. Protect what's yours. Don't hand over your dignity just to keep the peace. Stand your ground. Know the facts, and when someone tries to take what you built, make sure they realize you didn't build it by accident. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about justice, redemption, and reclaiming your life with integrity. For every man out there who's been blindsided, betrayed, or written off, it's not too late. You're not finished. If this hit home for you, do me a favor. Like this video if you believe in standing your ground. Subscribe for more stories that speak to real men facing real battles. And share this with someone who might need a reminder that calm doesn't mean weak and silence doesn't mean surrender. Your story isn't over. It's just getting started.